It's Ash from SuperVideos back for another video for The Last of Us on HBO. This is going to be my review for Season 1, Episode 3, which was called Long, Long Time, which was obviously a Bill and Frank-centric backstory episode. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break this down. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. To start, let's talk about the positives. I really enjoyed some of the interactions between Joel and Ellie in this episode. Some of it was very subtle and small, but it still was a very good way to build on the bond that we already have between these two characters. The other thing I loved is the atmospheric shots. It was fantastic, especially at the beginning, even though there are some memes about the 10 minutes west of Boston thing. But I didn't really care too much about how that wasn't or may not have been realistic. I also appreciated how they used the plane crash to give us some more details about the origin of the cordyceps fungus, or at least have that be the trigger for the conversation between Joel and Ellie about that. But I do wish that the plane crash was utilized some other way as well, because I think that the plane crash provided a good opportunity for Joel and Ellie to talk about Joel's daughter, Sarah, whose death ultimately indirectly came because of a plane crash as well. Additionally, I liked how they used the skulls on the ground to do the flashback to Bill early in the apocalypse and set up Billstown. I thought that was great. I think it was a powerful way to tease who those skulls were, but also not so much that it felt over the top. So I think that they did that just right, the way that they did it. Finally, I really enjoyed the emotionally charged and powerful love story between Bill and Frank, which was a nice touch that wasn't in the game. In the game, Frank was non-existent, really. But in the show, they really brought him forward and made him an actual character that means something in the grand scheme of the story. At least when it comes to Bill's story, let's put it that way. Now, let's talk about some of the negatives. I wasn't a big fan of the way Ellie was portrayed in this episode as a bit obnoxious, specifically when she was defending her position about Tess's death. I also felt that having Ellie cut that infected before killing it was an attempt to make her look like she has a dark side, to tease the story of part 2 of the game, but it came across as a bit forced and unnatural, unless that scene with Ellie and the infected was a way to just show us that she's curious, because she's never seen one up close and personal like that. As for the Bill and Frank backstory, while it was emotional and powerful, it was still a pretty generic post-apocalyptic love story. I didn't enjoy how this replaced the Billstown story from the game, because let's be honest here, it pretty much replaced the Billstown story. We never really got Billstown. What we got was an adaptation or a version of the story with Billstown from the game. They skipped over quite a lot. They completely ignored some pretty key things and some pretty awesome stuff that many video game fans were waiting for. Now on to something that has caused a frenzy in the fandom. And we're obviously talking about the elephant in the room. The representation that was showcased in this episode. Now, it's true that some people had a negative reaction to this episode because they are homophobic. However, it's not fair to group all those with negative comments together. There's a difference between not viewing a story about gay couples as special solely because it is a gay couple and actively hating on something because it's highlighting LGBTQIA representation. It's also worth noting that this episode was heavily overhyped, in my opinion, and it was rated fairly highly afterwards. solely because of the LGBTQIA representation. And I think some people are missing the point about why the episode wasn't well received by some video game fans. I'm not going to say all because there are some video game fans that enjoyed this. While I personally had no issues with the representation in this episode, I felt like the love story overshadowed the epic story that was in the game. They replaced all those little interactions between Joel, Ellie, and Bill, something that was a highlight of that part of the story. It was something that fans loved in the game. And on top of that, the epic action sequences with the runners and also the bloater in Bill's town was completely erased from the story and replaced with this love story. Now, with all of that said, this could have worked, but in a way where they're staying more true to the video game story, and how they could have done that is not killing Bill. They could have done the same thing, but with keeping Bill alive. I know that it made it more powerful, but with that decision to kill Bill, you ultimately ruined what could have been from the game. Or what they could have done is keep the same story, which was a beautiful story, but have it done with other characters, new characters. They didn't need to unnaturally inject this beautiful story into this episode. Also, it's important to remember that some people are not criticizing this episode because of the representation, but because they felt like the story was oversimplified and lacked the depth of the game. And I'm not talking about the emotional impact, because that was obviously better in the TV show, but in the development of the main characters, Joel and Ellie, and building and setting up the post-apocalyptic universe of The Last of Us. And to those who say fans are just hiding behind they should have kept it close to the game card to mask their homophobia, that's just pure ignorance. You can't really say that. It might be true for some people, but you can't make that point about everyone who's criticizing this episode. In conclusion, I will give this episode a 7 out of 10, a solid 7 out of 10. While it was beautiful and highlighted something that should be normalized, but unfortunately it's not, it was still a pretty generic love story that got overhyped because of the representation. People saying this was the best episode of 2023 in television are being either a little dishonest or a little vague about what their criteria are for coming up with that or having that opinion. I feel like if we ask people who say that why they say that's true, they just talk about the representation and they just talk about the emotional factor. But those are not enough. Like, those two things by themselves don't make this episode better than some other episodes of not just Last of Us, but any TV show out there. There's more to something being the best episode in television than just those two factors. At the end of the day, while episode 3 was a powerful story, it was not necessarily the most entertaining or better than the game version, in my opinion. Obviously, you could have your own opinion, it could be different than mine, but this is my opinion. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through. That's my review for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.